So for today's Conversations in Coffee, we are going to talk a bit about the Teapot Show that's featured right outside the door here. It is the challenge that we gave to the ceramic studio. And while I was making my teapot over here, I realized just how good of a challenge it is, because there's so many parts and pieces that come together to make a teapot. Mine was thrown on the wheel, so I made the body of the pot, the spout, the feet, the handles, the lid, trimming the body, the lid, cutting everything just right, getting them all to fit together, to dry correctly without any cracks forming, to put some sort of glaze surface on it, and then the final test of when you pour the water out, if it doesn't actually pour water. And you can't quite tell, you can't test that until it's fired, otherwise it'll just break the pot down. So it really is, it's sort of one of the first challenges that you get when you're a ceramic artist, and it really is a great technical challenge. And then the beauty of our studio is that we have so many different ways of people working with clay in different processes. So we have hand building and wheel throwing, and then like I mentioned, the surface design, some traditional glazes, lots of carving. We pulled out the Jurors Award winners here. We had our juror, who's here with us today, Carol Snyder is here, and the other instructor extraordinaire, Sandy's going to get up and chat a little bit here. When we pulled these out and thought maybe Carol could talk about these a little bit, we want to talk a little bit about the process of getting this challenge show together. I think that's kind of what you'll touch on here in a minute. And then, since we're here and we made teapots, we can talk about our actual teapots. But please start thinking of questions now, because the conversation, our part of it, is going to be probably ending a little earlier. So if we can get this into a conversation, then we can stretch it out. Otherwise, we'll just chat for as long as we can and go from there. So. With that, Sandy, if you want to talk maybe a little bit about the challenge?
I would say that you put it very well. To me, the compound form of a teapot is an engineering as well as a visual and aesthetic. Should I stand? I mean, we're in such a huge room. But that, in art school, that was one of the biggest challenges, of course, in ceramics, if you were working in function, because you're bringing together all the components. And in this case, we do have a lot. Everybody kind of assigns it to wheel throwing, but what was a beautiful part of it is it is sculptural in and of itself because of all the components that go together. So in my case, I basically threw and carved, and then it's an underglaze experience of stains under a glaze that's semi-transparent or semi-opaque, I guess is a little bit more like a better way to describe this, because it's not translucent. But everybody stepped up in such a way, I think, and took it beyond just trying to make a functional piece. For me, as a potter by livelihood, there it's really kind of important that it pour and not drip all over the place, which is its own challenge. And size and all that, really, it doesn't matter. And I'm hoping the ceramic challenges are going to keep going, and that people will be able to step up and explore some. We'll be setting more challenges in the future. But we appreciate all you guys coming too, and listening to us. Hopefully it's a nice day for a challenge. Carol here graduated from CCAD about the same time I did. Only she's way younger. I don't know how that happened.
Not way.
But she's a porcelain artist in her own right, and works for Ohio Designer Craftsman. So she's responsible for a lot of the exhibition, finding ways for a vehicle for artists to display and sell their work. So I invited her to do the jurying on this, and she kindly consented to it. I thought we would have her talk a bit about her choices and what we were looking at, because there were some great pieces, and so everybody's always like, well, what was it about that struck you? And it's always very personal, but it's also coming from a very informed. She's got a background in arms, like 2 arms Sanders here, so show coming up here at the Columbus Museum of Art. She's going to be a part of that here in May, so please catch that. Beautiful porcelain pieces. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Carol, so there is time for questions.
Okay.
And you can address any of us with questions. And it is interesting to get a little back and forth on why and the why, what, and where. You know, so please do feel free at any. You want to step up and.
Do I have to stand up?
No. Yeah. I had to.
I do?
Eric started it.
And
Yes.
can you command the room from
This is
seated
more
position?
conversation.
She is very.
Situation.
You're right. It ruined it for me when I stood up. It's just like, then it was.
I'll probably end up standing up, but well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for inviting me to Juried, because it was really difficult, actually. It was, you know, every piece was amazing, and as I started looking at them, and then, you know, you start looking at more, and no, this one's really great this way. They were all fantastic. And I want to repeat what Eric and Sandy said about teapots, because to start any kind of clay challenge off with, a teapot challenge is incredibly tough, because a teapot, I think, is probably the most insanely challenging functional form, because you have all of those elements that have to come together not only aesthetically but functionally. So, you know, you're faced with, and being, jurying shows is always, there's subjectivity that comes into it, but then you kind of have to pinpoint what really are you looking for. And so, considering all the elements that go into teapots, which there are, you know, you have the body, the spout, the handle, the lid. So are those elements all there, first of all, functionally? Then how do all of those come together aesthetically, but then at the same time, how does it all work together, but then each part works on its own? So the handle has to feel really good, you know, for a functional pot. It has to feel like, you know, it's not too thin to pick up the body of the pot, or too thick. It has to feel great. But again, go with that overall design and overall shape of all the other elements. Spout, same thing. It has to pour, which we weren't able to test, but you know, you can kind of see, is it too far at the bottom, too far at the top, the tilt, and again, how that form of that spout goes with the overall aesthetics of the entire form. Lid, same way. You know, is it going to stay on? Is it seated well? But also aesthetically, does it continue the form, the body, and you know, everything that's going on here with the line work of the overall piece? So they're actually really wonderful little sculptures if you think about it.
Proportion is so important.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
teapot. Every element has to be
really
proportionate.
is. And I think that it's something too that, gosh, you have to just do it a lot to keep getting it right. So there were wonderful, like really sculptural pieces, and then there were absolutely magnificent, purely, like beautifully thrown functional ones. So you kind of left with, well, how am I supposed to choose these? So I kind of decided I will do what I just said. Does it have all the elements of a teapot? Do they appear that they are going to be functioning properly? And then just aesthetically, the entire kind of aesthetic of the whole form, of all those parts coming together. So it's a combination of all that coming together to one piece. And I think when I first was designating like what pieces I really, really was jazzed about, I think I probably had 10, and Sandy was like, you gotta keep knocking it down. It's just really difficult. So say for instance, this one, the line work in it I thought was just incredible. I mean, again, you're making the teapot, but the spout, rather than just a straight spout, it's just got that little curve to it, that little it just continued that beautiful line work of the whole piece. So it could have just been a straight on spout, but I think they challenged themselves with, let's just do a little bit more to make it a little bit more of an organic shape. I really enjoyed the way this one was glazed a different color than the outside. So you get just that hint of a play of interior and exterior. And again, if you can visualize this all one color in and out, it's not the same. So just those little tweaks really caught my eye. To me, it kind of looked like it was something from Turkey or something. It was just again, the line work is, I thought, really organic.
That's a
and
very
wonderful.
challenging handle. That kind of handle.
The handle is incredible, yeah. So that again, and again, just the extra little thought about the overall shape, I think I enjoyed with that a lot.
I have a fun fact about that one.
Yeah.
Fun fact, so the artist is named Jet, she goes by Jet. She's taking class here and at Ohio State at the same time. And that clay is a black clay body that she developed at Ohio State. So not only was she pushing herself with the aesthetics of the piece, but then making her own clay.
That's interesting,
And
because
she
it's
wasn't
almost
sure how
an
fire.
unseen thing, but it was an influence that we
Yeah.
weren't even aware of.
Yeah.
No, that's
Because
great
it
to
did
know.
definitely influence that glaze.
Yeah, yeah. So no, that's a good added.
Yeah.
Yeah. As I go through, is there any questions? Like
Well, I was
maybe.
going to ask on that one, and I don't know, maybe you saw me do it. Was the handle kind of pieced in after the fact, or,
No, what?
you know, was the body?
The handle
Yeah.
is probably a pulled handle, and then it's added on just like those clay handles.
Okay.
But to get it
But
polished.
this is especially particularly difficult because it's so airy. The drying process would be really, you have to really watch
Well,
that
and it
for
flows so
cracking.
nicely from
Yeah.
where your left hand is, from the
Right.
back of the
It adds a
body
lot
of it.
to it.
Yeah,
Yes.
and so that technically is
It's got to
is
be
a
so
challenge.
fluid to get that curve, but yet you have to get it to hold in that
Right,
place
right.
while it sets up, yeah.
Right, because then you have this thinner clay with the clay body drying, at the same time. So
Right.
you have to watch those drying times and really monitor that. So that was.
I can talk a little bit to that too, because I have a similar handle on mine. And the way that, so I pulled the clay, and while it was separate, made this kind of contraption with 2 buckets and a stick going in between, and then a piece of foam so I could rest the clay. And then when it's still quite soft, but hardened just a little bit to hold its shape. Then I attached it, and then while it was attached with no lid on there, I put a little piece of foam in there to let it support while it dried a little bit more. So.
And one of the tricky things there is you have to have something that will give, because clay shrinks, and
Right.
so it
Yeah, so if
it
you're
Right.
can't
if it's
be
rigid, it'll
propping
crack.
up against something that's rigid. So
Yeah.
it's really, it is quite a
Yeah.
contraption looking thing when you're doing it.
Yeah.
I'm like, what is he doing?
Chopsticks going everywhere.
Right.
For kids.
So again, those little challenges of those pieces, parts, and just technically doing them, but then making them fit in with the overall form, I think is really important. Pinocchio, what can I say? It's, it's sculptural, but then again, every element is there for teapot. So it's just like the handle felt great, the lid is super well seated, but it's this wonderful 3-dimensional sculpture. So it just fit in with, I thought, again, there's other really wonderful sculptural pieces as well. But for me, it was all of the elements of the teapot. It looks like the spout's in the right spot. I mean, everything says teapot about it, but at the same time, really wonderful 3-dimensional sculpture. The depth of the carving is wonderful. The coloring, the glazes are really well done. So everything again comes together with the functionality and the aesthetics. Questions or comments about him?
Well, a point about that would be that because it is sculptural, you can get away with a little more weight that you would never accept in a functional throne piece.
True.
Because of the depth of the carve and all that, and because that's not the first and primary thing with that one, is that you're probably not gonna sit down and use that one, frankly. But since it was a teapot challenge, it didn't need to have all the components, but it can get away with when you go into sculptural and it's more, that's what it's
Right.
more about.
Right.
When you pick, if you would pick that up, you'd be like, never would you want to wait like that on a teapot you were going to sit down and actually serve out of. So you have a little bit different judgment criteria on a sculptural piece, don't you agree?
I do. So yeah, you go into the more
It's
geared
balanced,
towards the
it's well-made,
aesthetics,
balanced,
but it's
heavier.
yeah, it's definitely, it says teapot.
Yes,
which
yes.
is, also important.
Of
So,
course he did.
but he's really not that heavy.
He's
either.
not
He's
for a
not that
sculptural
bad.
piece.
No,
Not
so
at all.
that's good.
That's Kristen Morris. Some of you in the room would know Kristen. She takes classes here a lot. She's actually showing her Florida. I almost take for granted how good she is at sculpting figures and little monsters. and
She's
stuff.
been doing it
She's
for
a
a
real
while,
talent.
but she's got natural talent
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, and this is, 360, it's interesting
yeah.
all the way around, details, so that was really,
And not contrived.
No, it
Even
really-
somehow, doesn't look awkward.
Yeah.
She's been sculpting for many years and painting, mostly sculpting and then painting everything with acrylic paint. So that's one thing to her credit as an artist and learning here. She took on underglazes just only about a year and a half ago or so.
I'd say that is
so,
challenging.
Yeah, so
It's
just,
not the same
the
as
colors and everything. Those are what's called underglazes, which don't have the melting, they don't turn into glass. So you put them on there kind of like a painter would do, and that's what I did with mine. So you can put them on there, wipe them off. You can dry brush similarly to acrylic paint, so you can get some pretty
But
specific
it's
colors and
permanent
stuff.
color.
Yeah, and then once it's fired, it's got the
And
ceramic
honestly,
chemistry.
as
in
a
it.
ceramic snob, it's really important to me that the color be fired
Yeah,
on a ceramic
yeah.
piece.
Yeah, a ceramic, good
Does it
ceramic
color
snob.
that way?
will like
Does it
acrylic.
change color when it's fired?
Oh,
or
yeah. What you
No,
see is not
just-
what you
yeah.
get.
That's that.
Yeah, it still does that. It's closer. If you put blue on it, it will be blue after it's fired, but it's a slightly different
Okay.
shade of blue or whatever. Yeah, it'll change.
It is very, very much more difficult than painting because you have, that you don't know what you're gonna get till after the firing.
Yeah.
what, for glazes or underglaze?
Either.
Yeah.
Well,
Either,
glazes
yeah.
in particular.
Any fired product.
But yeah,
glazes,
glaze,
yeah.
underglaze, I think you're a little more.
But still, so much of that will fade. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to learn how to use them.
Right.
It's a whole nother set of,
Yeah.
a whole nother skill set.
Right,
Painting.
it's a little bit closer to what you see when you're first
But
putting it on.
that's
the
because the
piece.
stains added into
Yeah.
the materials.
Something with the underglazes too, when it's textured, those underglazes can be, like you say, wiped in.
Yeah.
So that you get that shadowing that normally with just putting a solid glaze
Yeah.
on you would lose.
Yeah,
So again, with that being textured, it makes it pop.
right, it really elaborates all of the carving and the
Mhm.
depth. That's true. And you can get more details too, I think. You're not, like with the eyes or even the little red feather, it doesn't tend to bleed like a glaze
Right.
would. So you can kind of keep the colors where they're supposed to be a little easier, I think.
Meant for decoration.
So the third one was this little guy, and he was just kind of in the mix all the time, and then actually I looked at him, and I was calling it him, but I picked it up, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to serve tea out of this. This is just like, to me it feels welcoming. It's kind of got this really beautiful glaze on that kind of buttery, and it just feels soft, and I just want to serve tea in it. So again, all of the elements are there. It's challenging because they put, a different material for the little handle, but this lid is well seated. This is a different way to do a handle, though, I mean, we've seen this done before, but I've seen them done where it's not as well proportioned as this. And it's so simple, but again, it's so welcoming. So it feels like you want to hold warm tea in it and serve it. So as I was looking at the three, really deciding like, okay, I think I was happy with it because, again, it's this three different sensibilities of this. Yes, it's absolutely tea, it's warm, it's comforting, I want to serve out of this. This one, the sculptural, the depth, the color, and that, the beautiful line work. So I think we kind of hit it all, even though there's plenty out there that do the same thing. These just kind of struck me that way. But to talk about this one more, it's just adorable, and like I said, I just would love to.
You talk about balance, that one does epitomize the balance of a teapot, where when you pick it up, it shouldn't be yanking on your hand, your wrist. It should balance, the weight is really, it's a nice
It
little
feels wonderful,
to pick up.
the choice of color, glaze, and even this little added guy on the top is just enough, so simplicity at its best.
One is he put in, whoever,
It is a he, by the
Okay.
way, you guys, your instinct's right on that.
what I would call a filter so that you can use loose tea in it. No, if you look in the spout, you can see it.
Yeah, the little,
Yeah. And I don't know how many of the others would have, but I
There were
noticed on
there
that
were
one.
some that did
Yeah.
that, yeah, and that's also, again, you know,
But that just looks like a teapot that ought to have loose tea in it.
Yeah, it does, you're
It
right,
is
you're
true
right,
functional.
you're right. Where you kind of sit and let it steep, and it's just, yeah, it's a very welcoming little piece, so, that was, you know, those are the choices, and that's kind of what I was looking at in all of them, and again, it was just super difficult, because every piece out there had something magnificent about it, really did. It was a really good challenge. Yes?
Yes, they look quite unconventional, but I think that it's being unconventional is what adds to its character.
Yeah, exactly. And once you actually hold this handle, you know, and it just feels very comfortable. It's like it's just the right size, and it feels really great.
Can you give any explanation, understanding about the wires in the top? Like, I wouldn't think that would be glue.
No. So what they did was, when you throw this or make the lid, they poked holes in the clay when it was probably leather hard and fired it. So you just have the lid with holes. Then when it comes out of the final glaze firing, you can wire through those holes and add natural materials or whatever you want. So it's done that way.
Ooh, yeah. I would think that'd be it.
And that's so much better.
Glue on it.
Yeah, this is
It's
a
both
so
ways.
much better way to do it than adhering it with glue. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's going to be decorative, not so much, but especially a functional piece, the heat of tea or whatever and glue, it just doesn't,
just says
it's not a
something
good match. So
different
yeah,
all the way around.
there's just little holes that are poked through.
I got to follow up on that, and I was actually going to, before you asked that question, I was going to mention the artist almost didn't submit this, because when you pick up the lid and you look underneath, the copper wires are twisted together, and it looks pretty nice, but his intention is to put a little dab of solder there to actually kind of melt them together. And he almost didn't submit it because of that. He goes, I don't know if I shouldn't do this. I said, just put it, it looks good. Like, it looks good.
Oh my gosh,
So
yeah.
he wanted a dab of solder?
Yeah,
and
he's-
then he-
I
Solder
think
would
he
be
plans on
different
soldering
than
it.
glue, but
He
Yeah.
ran out of time, I believe.
Yeah.
While you're holding
Right.
it, can I just see the
Yeah.
inside? Because I wouldn't touch it.
yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
It's
I
beautiful.
wouldn't care if that's, yeah. So they're just twisted.
Yeah.
And I, honestly, I enjoy that because that's the handmade, that's
It's
somebody's hand
gorgeous.
doing that. It's not gonna come apart or anything.
And what type of wire is that?
It's copper, probably.
Just straight
or
up
brass,
copper
I don't know,
wire?
copper.
Copper's not rust or anything.
Right.
Crazy in your teeth.
No, and it's just that little touch, you know, and then this little touch of copper line work kind of
The
mimics,
color, just a little.
the little bit of lines that are happening on the piece. So it just really starts talking, and it's really nice that way.
Would these people have sketched out their designs before they started, or did they just sort of go at it?
I might defer that to
Some
Sandy,
did, some
because she,
didn't,
with the
but
classes.
I would
that
always
work.
suggest sketching
That's a
first.
good question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Most people that I saw did some research at least and found examples of what they wanted to make. And frankly, that's what I did with mine. I searched, just Google image search for 10 minutes and scrolled through what felt like thousands of teapots and caught on two that I really liked. And what I did was I took the elements that I liked about that, and mostly the ones that I was noticing was a fully rounded bottom, and then with the feet added on. So that's the way that I kind of approached it. And then for the surface of mine, I carved and used underglazes like we were talking about. And it just seems like when I start carving, it starts to look like a tree. So then I kind of took the tree motif a little further, and on the top of the lid made it, you know, tried to make it look like if a stump were cut off. So this came about, I didn't have a sketch of a tree bark looking pot, but I had those original images, and then as it was kind of going along, as you're making it, you go from there sort of. So I'd say it's maybe 50-50 who start with an actual sketch and who just kind of wing it.
Yeah, because I know any teapots that I made, it would be, you know, I think I would do a couple of spouts, because as you're working it, you know, it's like, whoa, this one is not going to look good with this form. Get a different one, you know, so you have some
Or you
options to
miscut
work
when
with.
that's gone.
Right,
And
so
timing is everything.
until, yeah, and then like Eric was saying, until you're actually working with it and you start seeing those elements come together, so it has to, you have to be a
Especially
little,
for beginners, I always suggest a couple of lids, at
Yeah.
least two. Just
Yeah.
make a couple of those components so you can play with one.
Mhm.
If you get it right that first time, but then you're not so afraid
Mhm.
because you have a backup. And this one might fit better than that one, you know? Or you want to try a couple of different shapes and decide which one actually fits the piece better in the making, but nothing takes place in just doing.
Well, that's interesting. How do you make it fit, or how do you,
That's a matter of measuring as you're working,
okay.
but then you come back and do some adjustments when you're refining
When
it
it's
for the
still
final
softer.
leather hard. You wait for it set up. That's when everything goes together. When things are trimmed down to, you know, the perfect thickness, and then all of your components go together. The handle's the only thing really that you would make, or I would make at the time of putting it together. Because it is completely exposed on all sides, it sets up pretty quick. So you make that while you're trimming, and then you might go ahead and trim everything up and just go ahead and try things. Now, I like to throw the spout or the knob on my lid, but I will occasionally throw the knobs separate, and I'll do several of those and try them. See which one of these, this can be a separate component too. The knob itself is a separate component to the lid, to the handle, to the spout, to the belly of the pot. So, and just so many ways to go. So it just gives you options and kind of frees you up to, a lot of times that first one's the one that works. But the reason it works is because you feel more freed up because you have a backup.
Mhm.
So the body, though, you must have already cut the hole where the heat's gonna flow out.
That is part of what you do when you're trimming it.
Go on.
Yeah, you do that at that time.
And when you're setting the spout,
Yeah.
so you know.
That's where sketches help me, because when you're throwing that angle,
Yeah.
you have to kind of imagine how it's going to be when you're throwing it, and imagine what you're cutting off. So the shape of the spout, it really helps to sketch that ahead of time, so you kind of sketch it and you turn it the way it's going to go, and you say, okay, when I'm throwing that, it's going to be thrown this
So
way.
you've thrown
So I
that
cut
spout.
Uh-huh, yeah. Generally speaking, on a thrown teapot, the spout's thrown.
Because you can imagine, take this visually off the teapot, and it's just,
When it's
so what she's done is she has cut that at an angle so that it
And then I cut the lip to the spout.
And then these are difficult when you're cutting your spouts this way, because clay tends to turn
It
back.
unwinds.
It unwinds in the kiln ever so slightly. So these spouts, if they're cut this way at a flat angle, they have to be actually placed on a teapot
See how?
the opposite of how it's thrown,
I would have had
because
to put it
it's going to
backwards.
unwind in the kiln and straighten up when it's done.
So you gotta know your clay.
You do.
That kind of,
You got it.
that was kind of hard for even me to follow, and
Yeah.
that's really.
I had many spouts, I know, because I was
watching, or
Oh,
you
yeah,
put
it's
one
really-
on that you tried carving, go ahead and
Yeah.
attach it,
Yeah.
and it's going to turn.
it'll turn.
Because of that movement from the wheel.
The
when you're
In
throwing
the
it
kiln,
up.
it unwinds, so
Yeah.
it wants to go back to
There's a
where it
torque on
was.
something that tight, when you throw something that tight, same with the thin neck bottle. When you put that much torque on something, if you're gonna do any kind of carving or anything lining up at the top, you've gotta know your clay, how much it's gonna.
Wow.
Same thing with stems on a goblet.
Yeah.
Have you
Yeah.
ever seen some beginner goblets?
Yeah.
And if you could watch those in the kiln,
Oh, it'd be
they would
great.
be like going like this. And seriously, you've gotta know
Yeah.
if If they're uneven in wall thickness, they will unwind unevenly and even actually end up sitting off to the side because they actually do, your clay actually is moving in that kiln. You know, things are going on in there that we don't see. It's kind of like when they do
Ever
a
so
flower
slightly.
turning to the sun, they do this.
Right,
Actually
Yeah,
cares
yeah.
of the long-term
That would be cool.
exposure. It would be cool to watch.
It would be cool to watch, and you can see that, I was gonna point that out with the handles as well, because this, you know, this handle is leaning just ever so slightly. When it was built, it was perfectly straight up and down.
Right.
And I can speak for 100% for that
Right.
handle as
Yep.
well. There's a little bit of
Which, you
movement
know, that
comes
could
in, so-
bother you, or you could just say that is part of it. If it had been more awkward or it had slumped just a different way, it would have ruined that piece.
Right.
Every piece of clay is always just on, you know, when
Yeah.
you put it in a can, you just, you know, there's
Yeah.
always an element of crossing your fingers, but
Support,
the better
or
you know
keep
it.
your fingers crossed. Because I know I did many of teapot with the spout this way, and they came out of the kiln, and my spout was,
Yeah.
and it's like, didn't do it far enough this way.
yeah, or you're trying to remember, okay, which way?
Yeah, which way did I throw, which way does it need to go on? So, yeah, those cut spouts like that are difficult because of that. But it's fun and interesting.
Yes.
So the
It
way
makes for
that
good-
it, what the spout does has nothing to do with gravity. It's not going to move and go down. It's going
No.
It could.
What it's doing is, if she threw it this way on the wheel,
Yeah.
it's gonna unwind this way. So if she cut this
The
flat,
torque of the actual
this is
twist.
gonna go instead of being a straight cut across. It's gonna just go a little
A lot
bit.
of that's intuitive. I've done a lot of teapots like this, and believe me, I did have a couple that went,
Yeah,
you know, too far, but
Yeah.
I like them for that.
Yeah, I
They pour well. They did. And it weight on the end, if this were a big teapot, you know, or you were doing more sculptural, and it was a lot more weight on the piece, there is certainly a possibility of it slumping. If it were too thin in any of the support clay areas, because gravity does play a part. This actually softens it. Their clay itself softens a bit when it's hit mature. You're actually getting a little melt on it even. And so it's really important to when you're engineering a piece, let's say a large bowl like this with, oh boy, there again, if they're out there just suspended and they don't have any support here, they're gonna just in the kiln and, yeah, crazy stuff.
That's just like the glaze.
Comment.
I don't want to go from the spout to,
Oh,
I just
no.
want to, I question on the lid. When you bisque, do you put it all
Always.
together,
Always.
always, so it's all shrinking and
Always,
being
right.
just
Really
partnered?
important, when it's drying,
Yes.
they should be
So
sitting
you should
together.
be sitting together.
Yeah.
What about when you glaze? Do you just
Yes.
wax? You still
I
keep
still, I
yours
fire
together?
yeah.
Okay.
And the bigger the lid is, the more important that is, because, of course, the bigger it is, the more likely it is to warp.
Mm-hmm.
Because there again, there's all that unwinding, all that moving and shifting. It
Right.
has the memory of when you dinged it,
Uh.
putting it in the damp box. So if you want it to keep that, you know, keep that form. A smaller lid, it's not as important,
Mhm.
but the tighter, the better fit a lid is.
Do you ever have your glaze just kind of creep and kind of fuse and
Oh,
just kind
who
of?
hasn't?
I just wondered.
But you
I
can
could see
really, you
that.
get to know your glazes very well.
Mm.
I never would use a glaze I didn't know
That
without
would
testing
creep a
it.
little bit.
I need to know how much it moves.
Yeah.
And of course, that depends on the shape of the piece too. Your glaze, you know,
Yeah.
it's gravity there and the thickness of the glaze, it runs and gathers. Depending on the shape of the piece, it's more likely to kind of sets up sort of a downhill run if you have a glaze that moves a lot.
So yeah, so if you
You
don't
gotta know
kind
your
of know
glaze.
what we're talking about with that when you look at all of these, there's an area where wherever the clay touches has to be unglazed because the glaze melts and fuses to clay, so it would fuse together. Same reason that every piece of clay that you'll find has a little unglazed, including commercial pottery. There's a slight unglazed area where it sits on the kiln shelf, otherwise it would stick forever.
See,
So
on this smaller piece, he didn't,
yeah, this one I fired separately, but it was small enough that it fit back together. I made a companion teapot just because I knew likely I'd get one if I made two, and I did the same thing. I fired them separately because of the aesthetics of when you take the lid off you don't have a bright white of the porcelain if you can get glaze on there. But then I went ahead and ruined it because I put too much glaze on my lid and it fit tightly, and then with that extra thickness of glaze on there, and it came out of the kiln, and I said, great, oh, of course. And it's just, you know, it's, especially when it's so obviously your fault.
You know, honestly, it is an individual decision from piece to piece, that particular question, honestly, when it comes to whether or not you would glaze your lid together. So each piece, for different reasons, you might or might not.
Yeah, I think I was taught to do it, and then just recently heard, oh, you might be able to get away with it sometimes. So I'm kind of playing around with the two, but typically because of all that warping, you just want anything that sits together to dry together, fire together. You know,
It allows you to have a snug, nice snug fit without worrying about just one little centimeter being in a little fit. That's really a shame to lose a piece to too good a fit, right?
Yeah.
So we were talking about the spout tilting a little bit. Can you compensate for that when you put it in by overcorrecting in the other direction?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah.
When you're putting it together, when you're putting that spout on and it's cut like that, you want to put that cut part at a little tilt, maybe this way, because you know when it comes out of the kiln, it's going to straighten out. Yeah. So it's really, it's rotating this, the way you're putting it on. She's putting it on just a little rotated one way or the other so it evens up.
But you have to know which way it's going to tilt.
Right.
And how much.
It's the opposite of however she threw it.
Makes it a little more complicated.
Yeah.
It does. So when you see a
More
spot
of a
like that, just
challenge.
think
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
nice.
So what is the inside tip on remembering which, I mean, I don't get it.
For
I don't
me,
think I'm following that.
I've simplified it down to, there's all kinds of theory, but I've simplified it down to the direction that the wheel is going when you throw.
Mhm.
You can plan on it unwinding the opposite. It's as simple as that. Now,
Okay.
there may be all kinds of other things going on there, but that's how I remember.
The direction that the wheel is going. So that's just as
It's gonna go
simple
the
as
That's
whether
the
it's
drag.
clockwise,
Right,
yeah.
that's the drag, that's the torque.
Yeah,
It's
You're
gonna
twisting
undo.
it that way, so when it unwinds, it would come back
okay,
down.
that makes sense.
So
wheels don't always go clockwise or
Oh, no,
counterclockwise?
no, that depends on which side you are comfortable throwing.
Yeah, oftentimes it's a left-handed versus a right-handed thing. The rule of thumb that I teach is that you want the clay to go from your palm towards your fingertips. So I'm a
Through your
left-handed.
fingers, that's how I.
Yeah, kind of past your fingers this far.
Honestly, if you just try it the opposite way, you'll feel,
Yeah.
the clay is, it's more awkward.
Yeah.
The clay is actually running into your fingertips when it's going up through. It's just a more
Yeah,
comfortable feel, so if you pay
through your
attention.
fingers. So as a left-hander, this is my dominant hand, and I want to go clockwise, and then a right-hander wants to go
Oh, that, you're
counterclockwise.
left.
I'm left. Yeah.
I know you were
Oh
left.
yeah.
Warner's
So-
a righty and he throws left.
Oh yeah. See, and then I throw that in there, and there's
I know.
always someone
Always.
who it works better.
You want to hear
Opposite
something
rule of thumb.
interesting, and this is, I think this is curious, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but when you wedge for the direction you throw.
Yeah.
If I throw a piece of clay wall wedged, the torque is off.
What do you mean
What's
wedge?
going on here?
Yeah.
When you wedge clay to prepare it for throwing, you're de-airing it and lining the platelets up and kind of distributing the.
It
It's
looks.
like kneading dough.
It's sort of.
No, it's actually the opposite in that you're de-airing.
Yeah.
Well, okay,
It looks
but
like
that-
it,
but
that
it is-
process of working.
Yeah, similar to that, only it's actually the opposite result. But yeah, there's a spiral wedge most potters use, and if you put that torque on it, that twist on it, and you're right-handed, you are putting a right-handed twist on it, and somebody throwing left-handed, try throwing a piece
That
of
makes
clay with a
sense.
right-handed
Yeah.
Makes
person
sense.
wedge. You'll see
Yeah,
what
we're
I'm
getting
talking
kind of
about.
far with
I'm
the.
sorry, that's
No,
all right.
no, this is
I
great.
just thought it was
because
interesting.
with the twist of it in the kiln, like you have to start thinking about, and I think it's beneficial when you start working with clay as a beginner. You have to think about it as a material that you're sculpting, but then you have to realize on a molecular level almost what's happening in between the outside surfaces and the inside.
Tensions.
Those clay particles, how they're aligning, how they've been twisted, they'll untwist in the kiln. There's just so much to it.
Clay has its own nature. You have to kind of, I guess that becomes intuitive though. I mean, you can break it down. We like to break things down.
Yeah.
But it's our
You
feel.
you get to a point where you can
But
start to
it's-
understand it because you've experienced
I think
it.
it's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Always.
Yeah.
But certainly at whatever level you want to take it to. completely, scientific level without the aesthetics, and a lot of people, that's their jobs, the ceramic engineers,
Yeah.
folks like that, but it's incredibly broad subject.
Oh,
Yeah.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, clay is taken from deposits of cohesionless sediment, right?
It comes right out of the earth, generally around, they say there's a lot of deposits around coal, I think.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, that's where the compression of those materials, I believe it's almost always organic materials.
Yeah,
Like
there
dead
are.
organic material.
Matter of
like
fact, they
peat
say
moss.
clay is a sign that there was life, and when they found clay on Mars, they decided there was water there at one point, and Mars is like, yeah.
A special, I'm sorry, sir. A special thing on, what you said about clay being on Mars. I mean,
Yeah, I'm sorry, that was way off.
I know, but
subject.
still, I like the idea because I found out that they have found that water does well up on the surface of Mars
Right?
whenever the temperatures are just right.
Isn't that cool?
Mm-hmm.
Make something out of Mars clay.
Me too.
There you go.
We can get that
The new life goal. Yeah.
I'd like to see what's
Yeah.
under there, right?
Where does your clay come from?
Clay these days is a composite of materials that, it's a recipe, just like if you were baking. You add this for one result, that for another, depending on how high you want it to fire, whether you want it to be an ovenware or a functional piece of clay, or whether you want it to stand up to the weather, like a brick. It all depends on what you're going to do with it. But clay comes from all over, all the parts of clay comes from all over. When you have a natural deposit of clay that just, by the accidents of nature, it all came together in the earth on it. It's still got all the elements in it, it just came together, and now we figured that out, so we basically put our own recipes together depending on what we want. So it's all over the place. I know it comes from everywhere, but there's a lot down in southeastern Ohio, if that's it.
Yeah,
I
there's
mean,
like
Ohio is really big.
veins of it, and then something like porcelain that I work in, and I
Right.
think your pieces is they're not veins that you can just dig up and work with. So those are all, that porcelain is all made up of white minerals that make up that white clay body.
You can get it from all kinds of places.
But kaolin, yeah, you have to have kaolin from somewhere first, but then, so that's definitely not one that you just find a vein dig and use.
Essentially, what was the first thing we learned in ceramics? Aluminous and silica is your basis for ceramics. And water.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
We have a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued. Now, I love every one of these teapots, but on Eric's there, something is intriguing me, and I can't hold back from asking you.
All right, lay it on.
Where did you get the idea for your spout? It seems different.
Honestly, I had 2 or 3 spouts, and I cut them, and I was holding them up there, and I went with this one because it looked like a tree branch. Like I left it straight like that because it looked like if I had cut a tree branch. That was sort of the way that I was going with that. But why? What do you expand on that comment a little, Murder? I'm curious as to what you thought.
That's what it was reminding me.
Oh yeah? Oh good. Good.
That's-
It
you'd
looks a
already-
little larger than you would expect.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it is.
Yep.
But see, the colors, you already told us that you meant to make it like
Yeah.
a tree, the colors.
Yeah.
And I
The
can see that. Now I can see completely that I wasn't imagining that as
yeah.
a tree.
That's
branch.
right. Yep. Yeah. I actually and to what I said before about it kind of coming along, the carving happened after this was put on there, and it may have been. I actually ended up taking down quite a bit of the spout underneath here. I put it on there and wasn't quite happy with it. At first, because it looks a little bigger than normal, it doesn't quite fit, but I almost cut it off, and then I started to shave it down, and I thought, that sort of looks like a tree branch coming off there. So yeah, and then there's a little hidden thing on here. I carved my wife's and my initials
I was gonna
in a
write
heart
that
on the
down.
back there. EWR.
In case you wondered what those initials were.
So I wanted to ask, Does clay contain silicone?
Yes, yeah, all clay
It's one of
contains
the
silica. That's
bases.
one of the.
That's
yeah.
one question that or one answer that had eluded me for some time.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, I've always wanted to know.
Yeah, it's quite similar to glass. in its
Silicone, not
natural-
silicone.
So what's the difference between the clay that you work with and the clay that, children play with?
That
It may not be
My
any
kids
difference.
play with
I
the
was gonna
same
say,
stuff.
Depends on whose kids don't.
Yeah.
I think a lot of times, I've gotten that question before, and
You're not thinking of Play-Doh.
that, yeah, like the stuff that you use in,
Clay.
there's clay, but there's a colorful kind of air dry clay
Right.
that kids use, and that's mixed with not with water necessarily.
Think about the old fashioned clay,
What clay they call it?
modeling clay it was called.
Oh,
Oh,
modeling
like
clay
the
is,
plastoline,
that's
like
oil-based.
oil, yeah.
That's an oil-based clay. There's not really a whole lot of difference in the body of it. It's just not water, it's oil. It never can be fired.
It basically never dries, is
Yeah.
the oil content.
You can
Yeah, so
reuse it,
keep
reuse
molding
it.
it.
And that's the difference,
It's
water
oil-based.
versus oil.
Naive question about digging up clay. I'm from Southeast Ohio,
Oh, yeah.
so are you saying that the clay that you would dig up out of the ground has all those components in it? And if you tested it, maybe you could
Some
fire
of
it?
it can, yeah, and a lot of that did. A lot of the brick, I'm sure, from here was probably.
Yeah.
So like maybe in my
Dug up
yard, I
clay.
could dig up some
I
clay
can
and
test it. I know some
How fun is
artists
that?
who have, yeah, that's what their work is. They
Well, and in
found the
Japan,
veins
that's
of
how they're known.
clay.
The artist is known by where they get their materials.
So it's all together,
that's
Question.
fascinating.
Regions, yes.
Wow.
yeah.
Out where I live on the west side of Columbus, far west side by near Burton Field, there was a farmer, and I was painting his barn and, on canvas. And basically, he was telling me about the history of his house that was about 160 years old. And his great-grandparents actually dug up clay and actually made bricks to build the house.
That's
Wow.
great.
Right
I'm
on
quite
the
sure this
property.
building here
That is
probably is.
wonderful.
And
Yeah.
people don't realize, there's, and
Yeah.
then over the years, seeing people dig up basements, you can see pockets of clay in certain areas.
Yeah,
That's a whole nother color than the dirt.
yeah.
You go down to
That's
Nelsonville, all that gold,
wonderful.
all those gold brick, that's because there's a lot, that's the color of clay in their
And
area.
people don't realize that basically some of the stuff around here is actually made, some of the older structure is actually made from the nearest clay that they could get a hold of.
Sure.
Then they gotta make a kiln,
The old German
let it
masons.
dry, put it in the kiln. They gotta make their own kiln, and they had to know something about 160 years ago, how to make a kiln, to make their own bricks right on the property.
Yeah,
Right.
they knew a little bit about everything,
I've
which
done
was a
some-
handy thing, I'm sure.
I've done some building in Nepal, and they will literally dig up the backyard, put it in molds, and then let it let dry, and,
Sure.
and that's bricks.
Yeah, the adobe,
Yeah,
that's really cool.
Yeah.
The sun baked, basically sun dried.
Does that stand up as well?
Actually, for the climate, yeah, that the kind of West has come in and told them, oh, no, steel and all that, that's way better, but it's not for their climate. For their climate, what they were doing was really, really the better way to go.
Yeah, the insulation
It
properties
gives,
of it
it
is-
breathes, it's a living material, honestly. That's one of the reasons clay is such an ideal building material. It actually, you use a lower fire clay for that reason. It can actually breathe and move, and it's not so brittle. And it's not gonna break, it actually gives. It might crack here and there, where it gives, but it holds up actually better in a lot of cases, depending on what you want it to do.
so what will next year's challenge be?
We're working on that.
Well, okay, so-
Stay posted.
We
I mean, obviously,
It's
I
not-
understand more than I ever did before, the challenges involved in the teapot. And I would think you want something fairly complex, more than just,
Yeah,
maybe it's
well,
not giving enough credit to bowls, plates, but.
yeah. We like the idea of maybe components coming together, maybe challenging for height, and then also kind of interlocking pieces, so multiple pieces that might be stacked together.
It should give a good technical challenge.
Yeah, because it's a technical challenge always to have two pieces come, like we just talked about, for those reasons. And giving the other challenge of going height, then you'll have in the kiln, you won't be able to fire them together. So that's a whole another aspect of it, putting them together.
And the patience.
The patience, yeah. Yes, sir.
Over the years, I noticed some old doorknobs. I know they're not glass, but it looks more like clay, and it was heated.
There's porcelain doorknobs.
Yeah.
Doorknobs?
Yeah, they're very cool. Just like
Yeah.
the porcelain handles on your bath, your faucets and your old tubs and stuff.
Yeah. Clay built our civilization. My favorite, my personal, what I like to think was the origin of humans understanding clay. There's two of them. One that baskets were woven and then lined with clay and then accidentally caught on fire, and the clay on the inside stayed the same. The one that I like is the story that early humans were just playing with the mud and making little things next to the fire and threw them in there, and then the next day realized that the things they threw in the fire.
I kind of figure they might have dug a
Who
little
knows
deeper
the
than
actual
they thought
story.
for the fire pit.
Yeah.
And it was
Could
clay,
be.
actually
Yeah.
clay there, and after they put their fire out, I was like, huh.
Yeah.
I kind of
Very
figured
early
that
on, they realized
a
that.
very good
match.
Yeah, and that particular puddle didn't turn back into clay when it was
Right.
It's like, wait a minute.
Right.
Got a pot here.
All right.
It was
Well,
pretty cool.
unless there's any other questions, I suppose we could wrap this up. Make sure to check out the teapots as you walk out of here. And
Definitely.
if
Nice
we're
looking
staying around,
show.
we'd be happy to answer questions for you. So,
Thank you.
thanks, everyone.
Thank you.